Hello, everybody. Here we are. Welcome to our Mind Matters webcast with today's topic, Shtick to Solutions, Learning to Manage Uncertainty from the Masters of Comedy, which we certainly need some humor right now in the situation that we all find ourselves in. I'm Miriam Good. I'm the director of the Mind Science Foundation in San Antonio, Texas, and we are a private operating foundation with a mission to fund early career neuroscience researchers doing out-of-the-box, innovative brain research leading to improvements in the health and well-being of humankind. And we do this through our Brainstorm Neuroscience Pitch Competition, which is coming up this October, virtually, of course. And we're also committed to funding educational opportunities like this to give you trustworthy, science-based information and tools to help you realize that richer, more meaningful life that we all want. And certainly right now is a time when we need all the tools we can get. So as we get started, we do have the chat button down below if you want to click in and say hi or just monitor the conversation. I would love it if you wanted to let us know how you heard about today's program so that we can reach as many people as possible. This will be recorded. And we do also, if you look at that first message that I've left up there, we've added a handy dandy text to give feature that just helps us. This is a tough time for everybody. It's a tough time for nonprofits, and every dollar helps. So if you want to text the word funny to area code 210-864-9674, and again, that's in the chat, so you can see it there. And you'll have some prompts there, and we would appreciate any support you can give us. Really appreciate it. So it's no secret that we've all been forced out of our comfort zone and our status quo. I know at Mind Science, there are things that we had kind of thought, oh, we should try doing webcasts, or we should try doing this or that. And it never really happened because it didn't need to happen. We're comfortable, we do live events. Well, guess what? We can't do live events anymore. And what we had planned to do someday has now become what we do. And so we've had to, it's spurred some creativity for us. And a lot of what you're going to hear from Dr. McGraw and Dr. Guillory in their conversation is exactly how leaving the status quo, what steps can we take to take advantage of being forced out of our comfort zones to be more creative and innovative. So it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Peter McGraw. Dr. McGraw is a professor of marketing and psychology at the University of Colorado Boulder's Leeds School of Business. As a behavioral scientist, Dr. McGraw is a world leader in the study of humor. He directs the Humor Research Lab, love the acronym HURL. He's the co-author of the Humor Code and hosts the podcast, I'm Not Joking. His work has been covered by the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Time, NPR, BBC, and CNN. He teaches graduate courses in behavioral economics, marketing management. His most recent book, and the basis of our conversation today, is Shtick to Business, What the Masters of Comedy can teach you about breaking rules, being fearless, and building a serious career. Welcome, Dr. McGraw.
Thanks so much, Miriam. It's great to be a Mind Science alumni. This is my second time.
Yeah, and I'd also like to introduce Dr. Sean Guillory, who 10 or 11 years ago was my first Mind Science intern. Yep. And he is kind of like our gold standard for interns.
Oh my goodness.
He after his time with us, he went to Dartmouth and did a PhD in neuroscience. His dissertation was on the neuroscience of humor and laughter. And in his words, he's been enjoying the professional ride ever since then. And currently he builds automation robots, but reports that sadly, he has not gotten any of them to laugh.
Yeah.
So welcome, Sean. I'm going to turn it over to the two of you. And again, if you want to chime in, go ahead either on Q&A or chat.
Cool.
Gentlemen.
Thank you so much. And let me even just start at the very beginning, just as an absolute gush in terms of first for Mind Science Foundation, because they took this rascal off the street looking for more work in terms of learning more about neuroscience in the mind, and it has been a continuous relationship ever since in terms of always being big. Even my first humor conference I put on, they were there in terms of helpful, in terms of helping us sponsoring that. So continuously throughout my life, they've just been helpful in terms of my career in every direction I've gone to. So Miriam and every big thank you for that. And let's talk about another one that's been quite helpful. Peter, I met, I don't know if it was just the beginning of grad school or maybe a little bit in it, but I think I freaked him out because I think the Hurl website may have been up for like 3 weeks before I messaged and be like, oh goodness, because I was like excited for anybody in terms of who are interested in studying humor. And the thing that I hoped for in terms of reaching out at the very beginning is exactly what I've gotten in terms of the years following. Someone that's really looking to apply humor research, not just so it just stays there in the different sort of like academic literature, but really reaching out to different folks on professional level to understand the phenomena. He's done that throughout in terms of like all the different interviews. Humor Code, which is his first book, in terms of going around the world to different professionals, talking about the things that they do in terms of making comedy, not just what academics and psychologists think comedians are doing, but he went out there and really explored that. And I'm telling you right now, this next book, in terms of Shtick to Business, what we're here talking about today, some of the most just actionable insights, not just if you want to be like the next Richard Pryor or George Carlin, but anything in terms of your professional life. And like has been alluded today, this very special time that we're at, because ladies and gentlemen, we are pretty much in an improv space right now. With this whole COVID business. So I am so excited to talk about this book. And with that, let me turn it over to Peter. So you got my perspective in terms of how you began, but like, how did you get here, Peter? Like, what was your beginning? Like, what even got you kind of like interested in humor?
Well, Sean, you're first of all, you're too kind, and you're truly the smart one on this call, because you got out of academia. And so I've been like skating away from it in different ways, as you've been alluding to, but you just full on made the change. So, I have to say, I think that I had this idea, I stumbled on the question of what makes things funny, not at the very beginning of my career, like you, but rather about 10 years in. And there is something, because we're going to talk about creativity, there is something beneficial about having enough knowledge to be dangerous when it comes to creative or innovative processes. So the research on this is pretty clear. If you don't know anything about the topic, it's hard to be creative. If you know everything there is about the topic, it's hard to be creative, because you're kind of stuck. You're either between, you have to accept what people tell you as truth, or you believe everything that you believe as truth, versus being in that middle. And I felt like I was in that middle when I stumbled on the question. And I realized very quickly, as you know, I think it's an incredibly important topic. That is, we make lots and lots of decisions in order to try to pursue laughs, whether it be with our leisure choices, but also who becomes our friends, who becomes our life partners, where we decide to work, whom we decide to work for, and how. But it also is, what I have discovered, also a fascinating case study in creation. That is, that creating comedy is so incredibly difficult that we can learn from these masters, which is what so the first book is about what makes things funny. The second book is what can we learn from the funny people in the world. And I had decided that I wasn't going to just write dry, esoteric academic papers, which I have done in spades, mind you. But I felt like to understand this question, you needed a laboratory, but you needed to leave the laboratory. You had to see how the sausage was made. And so that led to clowning with Patch Adams in the Amazon jungle, visiting Palestine to look at comedy in the West Bank, place that you wouldn't expect to find a vibrant comedy scene, to going and hanging out with these Japanese comedians in the green room of these crazy Japanese game shows to understand what the hell is going on with these shows.
And
so,
I just want to pop in. We do have a question on, can you define how you're using the word shtick?
Okay. Yes, of course. So titling things, naming things is important. I really believe that. I think if you can name something well, you win the day, so to speak. And when I was approaching this second project, which is really, it's not a project about being funny, although as Sean alluded to, if you're interested in comedy, it has some how-to elements to it. It can kind of bring you up to speed in terms of understanding the world of comedy faster than you would otherwise. But it really is a book about thinking funny. And so the term shtick is a Yiddish term, and it's sort of a style. It's a bit. It's a way that you have that tends to be unique to yourself. So when you say he, she has a shtick, it's usually references a comedian, and it usually references something about a comedian's special, not talent, special approach. So Rodney Dangerfield's shtick was he doesn't get any respect. No one respects him, in that way. Mr. Bean's shtick, right, is this sort of pratfally, well-intentioned, well-meaning person who can't seem to get anything done. It's his shtick, and so on. We could talk.
Yeah, it seems like a mix between like a brand and an edge, sort of.
Yeah, it's what you're known for, in a sense. It is. I think it does have a branding element to it. I think that's a great observation, Sean.
Yeah, very good. And with that, another thing I kind of want to talk about with the book that is interesting in terms of with it, throughout the whole book, which again, I've never seen anything like this in terms of like humor literature. Throughout this whole book, you have a actual comedian kind of annotating the whole way through. Hilarious, even sometimes like actively disagreeing with you.
Yes.
So like, how did that come about, and like what was kind of the motivation behind that?
Yeah, so I have a special contributor to the book. His name is Shane Moss, and Shane is a very funny comedian and a good friend. Mm-hmm. And so Shane, while I'm a scientist who studies comedy, he's a comedian that talks about science. And so we were sort of destined to become brothers in a sense. And Shane is a very funny guy. He's a very generous guy. And he, so I invited him. What happened was I was talking to him about the book, and he would say like, that reminds me of this story, or, oh yeah, that definitely happens. And then one day I was just like, dude, why don't we just have a little change of voice? So we have these sections called Shtick from Shane, in which he gives personal anecdotes. He presents a contrarian view, which comedians are very good at doing that. And those sections are arguably the funniest part of the book. And so if you write a book about comedy, I learned this from my first book, people expect it to be funny. And so I wanted to dial up the funniness, and Shtick from Shane helps with that.
I see. So that's a very, very, so that's actually really cool in that aspect. And then, even I guess going back even further, because again, like some of the things in terms of motivation for your whole career was looking at things in terms of creativity and innovation, which coming from your business background in terms of like business psychology, I understand. Was there something that like nailed it in for you in terms of like why you wanted to look specifically at comedy and comedians in general versus say like advertising or marketing and kind of other kind of creative ventures? Was there like something like that really pulled you towards comedians?
Yeah, so it did actually. So I'll be perfectly honest. Part of my motivation to work on this new book was a desire to bring, as I call it, my day job teaching MBAs and my night job decoding comedy together. And my first instinct was to encourage people to be funnier, to talk about the benefits of developing a sense of humor and being effective in professional settings. Mm-hmm. And then I realized, and actually I remember the moment I realized this, I was giving a talk to like 200 people in a ballroom. And I remember thinking, you know, if I tell all 200 of these people to be funny, we've got to worry about that guy. You know, the guy who thinks he's funny.
Oh, goodness.
Right? That is that we have a bunch of people in the world who are skilled in comedy and a bunch of people who are not skilled at comedy. And the idea was, unfortunately, there's more people who are not skilled than skilled. And so if I tell them all to go forth and be funny, we might actually create a worse work environment.
Yeah, what have you unleashed?
And then the insight was, and this is relevant to Miriam's introduction, is that the value is not in being funny. The value is in thinking funny. That is, we are living in a time currently that demands creative thinking, novel thinking, breaking old habits, approaching things in new ways. And when you look at who is the best case study of the person who thinks differently, who approaches life with a sense of openness, creative thinking and innovation, it's the world's funniest people, because they actually have to, there's such a demand on novelty that each of them can't, there is no other Rodney Dangerfield, I get no respect, right? If someone does Rodney Dangerfield's bit, you can't do a cover of Rodney Dangerfield, but you can do a cover of the Rolling Stones. Moreover, Rodney Dangerfield had to change as he approached it. He couldn't tell the same jokes through his entire career. Mm-hmm. So the Rolling Stones can play Sympathy for the Devil at every concert and everybody's happy for 50 years. But a comedian can't tell the same joke twice. And so what these people have done is they've created practices and perspectives that lead them to be able to maximize creativity and make it look easy. And so there has to be something that us mortals, us boring people, can learn from. And that's what I became obsessed with.
I guess with that, bring the fire, Promethean fire down to us. Like, what are some of these like techniques that you kind of talk about that you think could be like helpful just for anybody?
Yeah, let's start with the simple one. I think this is one that everybody can get their head around. And I open the book with this idea. So first of all, I want to do a couple definitional things. I think that will be useful. So I want to define creativity and I want to define innovation for the audience. So my definition of creativity is an original, appropriate solution. You know, and so it's an act of creation is to solve a problem in a novel way, right? And so that's important for a moment, because obviously we want to solve problems. In the case of comedy, the solving the problem is getting someone to laugh. In the case of advertising, it's getting someone to develop a relationship with a brand or recognize that there's a solution that they didn't know exists and so on. Most people are actually pretty good at solving problems. The issue, though, is the novel part, the original part, is that there's a premium placed on solving problems in new ways, often because the new ways are better than the old ways. And so in the case of a comedian, creativity is making people laugh in a way that they've never been made to laugh before. Yeah. Innovation is taking the idea and turning it into something. Right, is actually producing something there. And I think that that's important because creative solutions may come from a single individual, but innovation rarely does. That is, innovation requires cooperation, requires others. And we can dive into that more deeply. Yeah. But let's talk about an example of a creative endeavor that comedians do. Comedians naturally think in reverse. And that is something that the average person doesn't do. So this is sort of comedy 101. Like if you're going to be a comedian, you either naturally do this or you learn to do it day one, which is to produce an opposing perspective. The lesson I call reverse it. And so if you think about it, a lot of comedy is essentially uses what they call misdirection or makes an argument in the opposite direction that you would expect. So it could be the premise for a joke. So for example, Chris Rock in the Netflix special Tambourine has a bit about how bullies are good. Right? So everyone agrees bullies are bad, and Chris Rock makes a impassioned, hilarious case for why bullies are good, right? He thinks in reverse in this way. It could also serve as the punchline for a joke. So I'm gonna test you, Sean, to see how closely you read the book. But I talk about Henny Youngman, the king of the one-liners.
King of the one-liners.
So Henny has this joke, which is, when I read about the dangers of drinking, I stopped.
Well, you may give it to you? Yeah,
Yes.
Stopped reading.
We stopped reading, right? You know. So the idea essentially is you read about the dangers, you stop drinking. Henny thinks in reverse, creates a great one-liner. I don't want to stop drinking, I'll stop reading. That's there.
Yeah.
So my argument, of course, is that reversals are great for making comedy, but they're also a great way to think about things in new ways. In part because when everybody's going in this direction and you're headed in the other direction, there's often opportunity. There's often that original solution.
Yeah.
So I'll give you a quick example of this. For 50 plus years, since the beginning of the health and wellness industry, entrepreneurs, businesses, people have been promising you and I how easy it is to lose weight, how easy it is to get in shape. And as a result, you get these stupid diets, the grapefruit diet. You get dumb products, right? Like toning shoes or shake weights and so on. And so the idea is easy, easy, easy. Well, what's thinking in reverse? Well, thinking in reverse is Tony Horton comes along with P90X.
Okay.
And Tony Horton says, getting in shape isn't easy. Getting in shape isn't difficult. It's insanely difficult. It's incredibly hard to do. And so in his workouts, they're insanely hard workouts. But guess what? They work.
Yeah.
Right? And so this took over the industry. It's hard to remember this now in a world of Orange Theory, CrossFit, you know, and so on. But P90X at the time, you know, it came in those like DVDs.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm dating myself, but it came in these DVDs. It was the most pirated DVD in the world.
Oh, I actually didn't know.
Right? So people were ripping How to Get Ripped, you know, that kind of thing. But that changed the industry, thinking in reverse. But at the time, that was a novel idea.
No joke. No joke.
No joke. That's exactly right. It's the formation of a joke, but it's not. Yeah, but it's not designed to be funny.
You caught me. I guess let's talk more about kind of like the times that we're in right now.
Sure.
It does seem like, again, we are definitely in like this, like a constant kind of like improv space. Mm-hmm. And one concept that, I mean, I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I just haven't come across it. This idea of the liminal space.
Yes.
I'll let you take it away and explain, because like I said, I think it's such a good concept that to share with the rest of the audience that could be helpful. That comedians are in there, and like, as you'll see, I'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me about this, because I don't get asked about this idea very much, and I think it's an important one. So, my argument, I wrote this book pre-COVID. Mm-hmm. But what I have found interesting is that actually the lessons in the book are more valuable during this time than before. And the reason is, as you've already alluded to, is we're having to improvise in ways that we never had to before. Mm-hmm. Like we would just follow a script with our private lives, our professional lives, and so on. Do this, do this, do this, work hard, get ahead, and so on. Suddenly what we're having to do is our old scripts don't work. The old rules don't work. And so we're living in a world where we're having to improvise. And comedians have been improvising for years in order to create comedy, but the lessons and the rules that go into improv can help us get along in a tumultuous world. The second thing is comics thrive during chaos. So to use Nassim Taleb's, who's written the book Fooled by Randomness and Anti-Fragile and so on.
Swan, yeah.
He has this term anti-fragile. These are entities that get stronger in times of turmoil, who thrive in chaos and so on. And comedians often do that. So think about Richard Pryor. Richard Pryor, in a drug-induced psychosis, lights himself on fire.
Yeah, he did.
Nearly dies. And what does he do? He turns that into a hilarious bit in his Live on Sunset Strip stand-up special, turns it to an element in JoJo Dancer, Your Life is Calling. He takes the bad things in life and he finds a way to make them good for him, profitable, and so on.
Yeah.
This notion of a liminal space, I think, is apt right now, especially. So liminality is essentially this idea of transition. So as human beings, we deal with transitions in two places. One is in the physical world. So walking into a house, the foyer of the house is a liminal space. It's a space that's designed for transition. You don't hang out in the foyer, that kind of thing. So there are literally liminal spaces in the world. These are spaces that are designed to transition you from one place to another. But we also have a psychological liminal spaces in our lives when we're undergoing transition. So for example, a pregnant woman is in a liminal space. That is, she's transitioning from not being a mom to being a mom. On graduation day, you're in a liminal space. You're leaving your schooling and moving off into another world. And liminal spaces are special places, right? Because you're not settled into those. And it allows you to think and observe and notice things that you wouldn't notice before.
I jump in because I found, and first of all, I hope everybody goes and gets a copy of the book. It's super, super useful. You have downloadable lessons, and you even have a YouTube playlist illustrating, so you can go to YouTube and everywhere in the book where he talks about a stand-up doing something, you can watch it. So it's great. And my question about liminal spaces is this, we've all been jerked out of whatever we were in before. And so I do definitely feel like we've been in a liminal space, but, and when you can strip away like kind of the panic surrounding that, I think for most of us, we're beyond maybe the panic stage and are able to observe and start making these adjustments with kind of this odd, kind of weird gift. I mean, I don't want to say that the pandemic is a gift, of course, but we're given an opportunity. So is stepping out of the liminal, is there a way in which you want to keep your mindset liminal? Because it's at some point you've observed, you've formulated a plan. Does that mean you step out of the liminal space, or does that mean that you try and keep that liminal mindset with you?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for asking that question, Miriam. So where I think it's interesting is the comedians naturally live. So they're what I call liminal workers. Like they don't really fit into the world. They're so Jerry Seinfeld says comedians are humanoids. So they're not aliens, right? They're not like they're coming to this planet with knowing nothing, but they're not humans. They're not normal. Not like normal people are normal. And as a result, they see opportunities. They see the perplexing things, that exist in the world. And then, of course, they turn those into comedy. Well, liminal spaces have that element. Because they're transitions, they provide opportunity to notice new things and to take stock. And so your observation is that we are in a liminal space right now. it looks like we're going to be in it for at least 6 more months, maybe more, maybe a year. You know, it's going to be a long time before this sort of goes away. And so if we were to apply the reversal, so your thing is, oh, I don't want to say this is good. I do. I want to say this is good. And the reason is I have to say it's good. And because I want to think in reverse, right? So if everybody's saying this is bad, and then they're going to have all the problems associated with thinking it's bad, I want to think about it as good. And so what we want to do is first of all say, what are the opportunities here? Because I can only control what I can control. Where's the good in this? And then because your habits are disrupted, because you have new needs, because the world on the other side is going to be different in some way, shape, or form, this is a moment to sit and think and read and talk and observe and plan. And so what I would do is I would relate this idea of a liminal space to another lesson in the book, which I talk about writing and the value of writing. And my argument is that the comedians, their most important tool is not a microphone. Their most important tool is a notepad, is a notebook. And what I invite the listeners and viewers to do is, it's one thing to think about stuff and to go, okay, I recognize, yeah, this is an unusual time. There are obviously really bad things happening, but there's opportunity. Yeah. So in the same way that post-traumatic stress occurs, there also is an opposite effect, which is post-traumatic growth. And we don't pay enough attention to post-traumatic growth. And it's like, where are my opportunities to make change, to improve things for myself, for my family, for my business, and so on? But the way to really nail this is not just to let it work through your gray matter, but to put pen to paper and to start recording what you're thinking and how you're feeling and what are your thoughts, and start to clarify them, because writing helps us not only record our ideas so we can look back a year, 2 years, 20 years back to these moments and how fantastic they are, but then also to then work through ideas and admit that most of the ideas are going to be bad. If you want a good creative idea, one of the best predictors is the number of ideas you work through. And so I think what liminal spaces do and a liminal mindset does is it allows us to see things in a way that we don't normally see them. So thank you.
Excellent. And with that, with the time we have here, I kind of wanted to get more in terms of like some of the concepts, but let me again like plug the book in terms of things like different improvisational rules in the book, like from cover to cover, they're just all in there. So again, I definitely want to again point people back to the book in terms of that. But some of the interesting
you're like the ultimate hype man and woman for me right now. My goodness.
Getting paid for this. Like I'm telling people again, for years and years on humor scholarship, this is a fantastic book. Again, I wouldn't be here if I didn't think that. So yeah, so please go after it. And another kind of interesting concept that was brought up was this idea that some comedians are thermometers and some are thermostats. And again, we're trying to think of more things to like help folks in terms of to kind of like use this as an opportunity and the potential that we have in this current liminal space. So again, like you could, it sounds like, from the examples you have, you can make a totally wonderful career as a thermometer, like throughout and through. But I am curious on like, how do we make more thermostats out there? Like really trying to change things. So I am curious if you kind of have any insights on that.
Okay, so let's define what it means to be a comedic thermometer and a comedic thermostat for a moment. So this came up in the humor code, and I hadn't really thought much about it, but it's so if you ask a comedian, what do you want to do? Comedian's going to say, I want to change the world. I want to change the way people think. But if you said, okay, but you're never going to get a laugh again. You got to choose the laughs or changing the world.
Oh, goodness.
Most comedians are going to choose the laughs.
Yeah.
That's their business. That's what makes them grow. That's what they work so hard for. And that's the sort of thermometer view, which is that what most comedians do is they're sort of taking the temperature of the room and then they're making jokes about it. And the audience is laughing where they say, I agree. I basically agree with your perspective for the most part. A thermostat view is I'm going to change the world. That is, I'm going to change the temperature in the room. I'm going to make it hotter in here. I'm going to make it colder in here. And that part of the metaphor is I'm going to change people's minds.
Yeah.
I'm going to change the world. And you could point to comics who have done this, so you can argue that like Lenny Bruce in part not only made people laugh, but he pushed the boundaries to such a degree that he changed what's okay to say on a stage and what's not okay to say. I like the example of Hannibal Buress. So for people who don't know Hannibal's like, he did a stint on SNL, but never really had any of his sketches, picked by Lorne Michaels. But he's a very funny stand-up comedian. He's on Broad City. You'd recognize Hannibal if you don't already know him.
Yeah.
Hannibal did a bit about Bill Cosby.
Yep.
Bill Cosby was chastising young black men for their saggy pants and telling them to pull their pants up. And this bothered Hannibal and pointed out the hypocrisy that Bill Cosby had. And he brought up Bill Cosby's issues as a rapist that had sort of been an open secret in some ways. And his clip helped push that movement forward where women started coming forth with their stories. That's a situation where a joke changed the temperature in the room, changed the temperature in a nation, in a sense. And so how do you relate that to everyday people? Well, I mean, I think a lot of what I do in Shtick to Business is really designed for people who want to live a better life. They want to get ahead in business. They want to be happier with their work. They want to be more entrepreneurial minded. They want to enjoy their professional lives more. And I'm not saying enjoy it as in like, ha, 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 let's make jokes and bumble our way through it, but enjoy it as in terms of developing true expertise, a craftsperson perspective, being good at what they do. Well, if you take this thermometer idea, well, one of them is it could get you to pay attention to the world a lot better. That is, what are the needs that are out there in the world? And let me then go and try to find better ways to meet those needs. That's the sort of classic business response. The hardcore entrepreneurial response, the thermostat response is, what can I create that's going to change the world? And to be honest, the radical innovations that we have are the ones that really change the world. The Ubers, the Airbnbs, the autonomous driving, the Amazons, the things where people go, it'll never work. That's crazy, right? That's a very thermostat perspective. To be able to have the audacity to believe I can change the way people are going to behave. Not I'm going to just help solve a problem. I have a better mousetrap, right? It's just like, I don't have a better mousetrap. I've found a way that we don't even have to worry about mice anymore.
And with that, since funny enough, we're still talking about temperature, another brilliant insight that you had in the book was this idea of, I'll just throw out in terms of the analogy, not serving warm tea. But I thought it was just absolutely brilliant because, again, I actually don't want to give it away, but again, this whole idea of, folks want to get something that like appeals to everybody, or like get something that on average is better than not versus going more for broke in terms of it needs to either be hot or cold tea. But with that, I kind of wanted you to talk more about, because again, I absolutely love that part in the book.
Yeah, it's a really fun idea. So the lesson is called Create a Chasm. And it came out of this observation about how comedians are, every other week, it seems like a comedian's in trouble for something that he or she said on social media or said on a show or something like that. And what I realized was these comedians are going to keep telling these jokes as long as their audience is laughing. And what they recognize is a fundamental element in business, which is you can't make everyone happy. Because people have diverse needs, wants, desires, cultures, lifestyles, values. You can't create something that makes everyone happy, right? So in a world that wants hot tea or iced tea, if you serve everybody warm tea, no one is happy.
Yeah. And
so this actually relates to some of the work that I've done, which you're familiar with on humor. So this is just a visual look at what we call the benign violation theory, right? This essentially in picture form is what makes things funny. That is, we tend to laugh at what is wrong yet okay, what is threatening yet safe, or as I call them, benign violations. And so my collaborator, Caleb Warren, and I have come up with this concept, building on work by Thomas Veitch. So the neat thing about the benign violation theory is what it suggests is there's a sweet spot in comedy, right? Between being completely a violation, completely wrong, and completely okay or benign. Boring on one hand, offensive on the other hand. And so it explains the two ways that a humor attempt can fail. It can be boring, yawn-worthy, you know, a knock-knock joke, or it can be offensive, right? A sexist or racist joke. But it also explains how the very same joke makes one person laugh, another person yawn, and another person completely outraged. And because what's wrong and what's okay, what's benign and what's a violation, depends on people's values, people's culture, people's lifestyle, and so on. And so what it means essentially is if you want to make people laugh, there's nothing that can make everyone laugh. You've got to pick your audience and make them laugh. Well, the same is true in business. You can't make something for everyone, especially when you're starting out. You have to make something for someone, a small segment there. And so recognizing that you need to serve hot tea or iced tea, but not warm tea, is a powerful idea. Yeah. So I'll give you a quick example of this. So I'm on a leave of absence and I'm living in California. And California has kind of something for everyone. You know, it's got beaches, it's got mountains, it's got deserts, it's got big cities, it's got a little bit of everything. But suppose you're Nebraska. Right? Nebraska doesn't have something for everyone, you know? And you could try to be something for everyone, but Nebraska, with their new state motto, recognize this isn't the case. This is their new state motto. Nebraska, honestly, it's not for everyone. Right? Like, what a great idea. Like, you know, we're not for everyone, but for the people who like us, boy, you're going to really like Nebraska.
They're going to love it.
You know?
I'm going to jump in quickly.
Please.
We have about we can go a little bit over because this is a great conversation. But I wanted to talk really quickly about a couple of things that I think most of us are experiencing. The first one is, okay, I know that I have to, as an improv, you know, using the analogy of an improv company, I know that I'm going to be given a couple of words and I have to make something up out of all of this.
Yes.
So like what are some of the skills from improv that we can learn to apply to today? And then also the other big question, how can I be productive from home? What can humor teach us about that?
Okay. So let's tackle the first one. So I agree. We're having to improvise more than ever. The standard set of rules, which by the way, weren't very good to begin with, are now
spit take, clip it.
Like you think about it, there's all this stuff of like, oh, this is the way it's supposed to be done. And the reason why we were doing it, as Miriam, you were alluding to early on, was just because that's the way it's always been done. Like, I hate this idea that businesses, every problem they want to solve, they do it in the same way. All right, let's call a meeting. Let's sit around this rectangular table under these harsh fluorescent lights and expect people to be creative. Right? It's an absurd idea. So everybody, not everybody, but most listeners, I'm sure, are familiar with this yes and rule of
terms
improv, that you're supposed to yes and. That is, you're supposed to build on your ideas in order to take this kernel of an idea and turn it into a scene, turn it into a story of some type, and ideally an entertaining one. And I think that's fine. I think that's actually a good place to start, is we want to try to build on ideas and not cut them down. But I think there are other rules of improv that are equal or more important. And I'll give you two. Mm-hmm. So the first one is, it's a mini lesson. It's a mini lesson I call Hear, Here. Hearhere. Okay, so let's hear, hear. And it's the value of listening, right? It's the value of listening. And this is especially for managers and leaders. There's this tendency to think about leaders as sort of steering a ship. You know, the sort of bold, you know, I make the decisions and I live with the consequences and so on. And I'm the expert and I know. But let's be honest, the idea of putting all that pressure on a single individual to have this kind of vision is a lot to ask. Mm-hmm. And to have that person not listen is a mistake, because there's a lot of value within organizations. There's a lot of value within the expertise of the people with the boots on the ground, if I can mix my metaphors for a moment. Gotcha. And so in improv, listening is paramount. And the reason is because we're creating a scene out of nothing. Now, this may sound crazy to the viewers, but when you watch an improv show, none of it is rehearsed. And actually, they're so against rehearsal. If an improv team feels like they're going into a scene that feels like an old scene that they did 2 years ago, they will purposely move it in another direction. So any improv show you see is unique. Mm-hmm. It's one of a kind. In order to be able to create this, you need to be listening in a way that the average person struggles with. Because let's be honest, most people, when they're sitting in a meeting, they're just thinking about what they're going to say in order to look good.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Right? By the way, they do this on a date too. They do it almost they do it at cocktail parties. They do it everywhere. It's not that people are bad people. It's just that's the way we're wired.
Yeah.
But if you're an improviser and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to drop this line coming up and it's going to be so good, and you're paying attention to what's going on in your head and you're not listening to what's going on the stage, you're missing valuable information. Mm-hmm. Because these two people might be setting up the scene that we're on Mars, and in your mind, you're on a boat. Yeah. And so you risk blowing up the scene by not being a good listener. So you have to be listening and thinking all at once. It is an incredibly difficult skill. Fortunately, in a meeting, let's say, or at a cocktail party, that's a lot easier. You know, you could be taking notes at the meeting. You can, you know what I mean, this kind of stuff. But if you want to collaborate and solve a problem, you need to do it with others. And it's like, listen first, talk second. Mm-hmm. The second one is a perspective. And the perspective is, I'm not the person who's steering the boat. I'm the important one, and I need to get everyone in line. But rather, we're all in this together. How can I make my team better? How can my team make me better? How can I make my teammates better? So Del Close, who's one of the fathers of improv, had this saying, which is, we're all supporting actors. There's no stars on this stage. We're all supporting. If we all behave like supporting actors, this week, Sean's the star. Next week, Miriam will be the star. The next week, Peter will be the star. And, you know, that will happen sort of organically. And so this idea of having this sort of servant mentality, how can I make you better? If you can make me better, we're all going to be better off. And I just forgot your second question, which was,
you know, how can we, you know, comics who don't go to an office every day somehow manage to be incredibly productive?
Yes.
How can we be productive now?
Yes, thank you. So, so obviously, you don't want comics in your office, right? Like, these are not people who play well in these very structured environments. They were the class clown, you know what I mean? They chafed at a classroom experience. And yet they appear like they're slacking off, and yet they're incredibly productive. So I have a chapter called Work Hard or Hardly Work in the book. And in it, I talk about the need, let's be honest, you have one of two problems in your professional life. You're either not working hard enough or you're working too hard. You're either grinding too much and stressed out and struggling, or you're struggling because you procrastinate and you don't take care of business, and now you're stressed out because of your deadlines. What's fascinating is the comics who look like they're total slackers, they actually have beats in their day that allow them to both enjoy themselves and work on their most important part of the craft. So for a stand-up comic, it looks something like this. They spend time writing, and that's the producing the ideas of their jokes. They're writing there in their notebook and so on. They may be doing it at a coffee shop. They may be doing it on their couch. They're certainly not doing it in a shared office space. And then they go to a comedy club at night, at least they were, and they work through their ideas on stage. They have a lot of time in between in which they kind of enjoy their life, and they use it to feed their ideas. But what do they do is they work on the craft every day. So Jerry Seinfeld has the saying of don't break the chain. So when he's working on a special, he gets one of those desk calendars. He makes an X every day. He works on his craft. After 3 days, he has a chain, and he makes sure he works on it regularly. So that is, you're better off working 2 hours very, very hard on a project every day rather than 14 hours in one day, you know, in that sense. The other one is the time that you spend working should be sacred. That is, you don't schedule dentist appointments during this important creative work. You don't allow yourself to answer emails during this important creative work. You shut the door. You know, I'm here, mommy, daddy, whatever it is. You have your time that allows you to be fully focused, and then you release yourself. That's there. But I do think one of the things that's special about right now is it is important to have a space that is truly dedicated to that sacred time, right? So doing it at the dinner table is very difficult because the dinner table gets used for dinner and for crafts and for other kinds of things. So I think engineering a space to the best of your abilities, I recognize the challenges that people have, that is like, when I'm in this space, I'm working. When I'm out of this space, I'm not working. And so I do think that there is some advantage to that idea of creating this sacred time that's protected, doing that work regularly, and then making sure you release yourself. I actually think that people have the opposite problem than we think that they do. They're having a hard time turning off. The average person knows to stop working because they have to drive home, right? And that's their liminal time in the commute. Now you're at home, there's no cues to stop working. And so I think we're finding out things about remote work that we didn't know before, which is it can be productive.
Yeah. Super. So we have, we're going to wrap up with a couple of questions from the audience. How will virtual space change comedy? Any ideas?
Well, I think that these comics who are doing these sort of live comedy shows, these live stand-up comedy shows, I think it's a mistake, to be honest. I don't think it's a bad idea. I think they're missing an opportunity. Yeah. So, you know, I make an argument that comedians are these really creative people. But if you take the comedy club experience and try to move it to Zoom, that's a mistake. Because what makes the comedy club experience special is not an audience and a person with a microphone. It's the comedy club plus the audience plus the microphone. That is, the room makes the comedy work. The low ceilings, the darkness, the crowding people in. And so to try to just simulate that online, I think is a mistake, because the same jokes aren't going to be as funny. They're just, I know this from the psychological research. I know it from my own observations. The same joke in a half-empty comedy space is not as funny as a joke in a packed comedy space.
So you can't just put the brick Zoom background and have it all
Yes.
just work from there.
Thank you. So, but where is the thing is what we're going to see now is new forms of comedy, better TV shows, better sketches, because what's going to happen is it's not that these comedians are going to stop doing comedy. They're going to start using their creative energies on new pursuits. And so I think, look, the comedy club scene is going to come back once we can crowd people in a room again. But what we're going to see is an explosion of other types of ideas. And I think that's very exciting.
Amazing. Okay, really, I don't know if it's possible to answer this in 4 minutes, but
Okay.
Claudia asks, no pressure. Claudia asks, would you draw a through line from Shtick and the comedic perspective a Shtick entails to liminal spaces as spaces that make it possible to try on these new reversed innovative perspectives?
My goodness.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
That's a great question. I'm not sure I can do that. Not in this time period. But what I would say to Claudia is, I think you can do it. That is, if you don't have a journal, Claudia, it's time to buy one. And I think and I think that idea is essentially you write down this idea of liminal space and this idea of the reversal, and you think about it within rather than me talking about it abstractly, you think about it within your world. What are the puzzles and the problems that you're trying to cope with? Are they professional? Are they personal? Are they health? Are they well-being? And then say, what are the opportunities that I have as the world is in this transition and my life is in this transition? What can I say is bad? Can I say is good? What are the problems? What are the solutions that I'm considering? Can I do? So there's a task. So Miriam, you mentioned this. If you go to petermcgraw.org, you can download the workbook that accompanies the book. In the workbook, I have an exercise called shitstorming, or the HR-friendly term shtick storming. And in shitstorming, you purposely brainstorm bad ideas, terrible ideas. And that has the benefit because it's a good warm-up for traditional brainstorming. But also sometimes what happens is you go, that bad idea is so crazy, it just might work.
Yeah.
Super, thank you. Well, thank you to both of our guests today, Dr. Peter McGraw, Dr. Sean Guillory. We're so pleased and thankful. And I will make one last pitch for our text to give. This was our big innovation. We're thrilled with ourselves for figuring this out this late in the game. But if you will text funny to area code 210-864-9674, and we'll include that a link to that in our follow-up email. It's also up here at the top of pinned up at the top of our chat. But really, thanks to both of you for giving us a new perspective on how we can move through this crazy time with a little more intention and certainly a few more laughs. So thank you so much, everybody.
Yep.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Fantastic. Nice.